Priti Patel wants you to believe the Conservative Party are the valiant defenders of British sovereignty, fighting over a weak Labour government to save the Chagos Islands. But the documents tell a different story, one where the heroes are actually the architects of the very deal they're now trashing. She's not just saying we opposed it, she's saying she forced the government to back down, that it was forensic scrutiny, that the magic key was her raising the 1966 treaty, and that the real scandal is Labour handing over the Chagos while coughing up $35 billion.
You're claiming credit for having forced the government to back down on the transfer of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. But in truth, it wasn't you at all, it was Donald Trump. And shouldn't that worry you, that our Parliament only gets to vote on something that Donald Trump thinks it's OK for us to vote on?
No, Trevor, I have to say that's just wrong. Let me just say this, that is wrong. I've led the work on this since last year, since this whole treaty. It's a treaty that went through Parliament, didn't actually go through any parliamentary scrutiny, and we thrashed the government on that and made it perfectly clear that we were unhappy about that, how unacceptable it was. And it was through forensic scrutiny, over 160 parliamentary questions, forcing debates which the government did not want, really putting them under scrutiny.
But they didn't back off until Friday after Donald Trump had
So there are two things here. It is right that the President spoke about this, and there's been a lot of work over the last 12 months and more interestingly over the last 4 months, and that is the silent diplomacy. My party is engaged privately. I have had conversations in the last year with the State Department as well, and there are others that we've engaged with. In fact, the reason why this has now become a massive problem for the government is because I think it was last Tuesday in the House of Commons when there was ping-pong between the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and this shows that you need to be forensic in Parliament, work as a team between two houses.
Oh, pretty. Here's the problem. You're performing competence, but you're doing it in a way that makes your own party look even more ridiculous, because the basic timeline is public and makes you look like you're arguing against with a calendar. It wasn't Starmer who woke up one day and decided to give the islands back. It was James Cleverly, the Conservative Foreign Secretary at the time, who initiated the negotiations in November of 2022. The Conservatives didn't just engage privately, as she claims. They presided over 11 rounds of negotiations. Labour, they'd only been in power for the last 2. Now, let's deal with the 3 headline claims you make here, because each one is a mess. First, we've got the "I've led the work on this. Since last year, we forced debates, we forced scrutiny" claim. No, what you've done is you've just turned up at the end of the process that your parties began. If you really want to talk about scrutiny, then scrutinise your own side's records. Years in charge, years in international legal pressure, years of warning lights on the dashboard, and then suddenly negotiations under the Conservatives anyway. It's not Labour being weak, it's your party realising you boxed yourselves in. Second, the 1966 treaty claim.
I raised the 1966 treaty, which basically clearly says that Britain is sovereign over the particular territory, over Chagos, and it was a treaty with America, and that the Americans must be consulted on this. And in fact, the reason why the government had to pull its whole position in the debate in the House of Lords on Monday is because of the direct reference to the 1966 treaty, and we calls for the government.
This one is classical political sleight of hand. Take a real document, say a true sentence from it, then imply a conclusion that doesn't follow. Yes, the 1966 US-UK arrangements talks about the territory remaining under UK sovereignty at the time. That's not the same as, therefore, the UK is permanently sovereign and can never transfer anything ever. That is you waving an old agreement around like a magic spell. Treaties get amended, arrangements change. That's literally how foreign policy works.
There's a reason for it, though. You know this, Trevor, around Chagos, and that's a military base called Diego Garcia.
Indeed.
And that base is operationalised by the Americans. That is crucial to our joint security, the security of America, I would argue much of the Western world as well, in terms of military operations and the deployments from there, but also for our country. And therefore, it is an absolute disgrace that Keir Starmer, through his complete weakness, basically wanted to hand over, and by the way, this is the whole of the Labour government, hand over Chagos to the government of Mauritius.
And you know what's especially funny? If your position is the Americans must be consulted, then you've admitted the obvious. The base matters and the US view matters, and any deal worth doing will involve US sign-off, which makes your "this is all Labour's weakness" line even weaker. Because the grown-up version of this story is, the UK tries to secure a base long-term, with US involvement, while resolving a dispute that's been dragging on for decades. And then we get to the money. This is where it gets embarrassing. Patel confidently states this deal involves 35 billion of British taxpayers' money. She repeats it, 35 billion.
We were the ones that did the scrutiny on the £35 billion that we would also give to the government of Mauritius. What that means for our country in terms of denuding our national security, lack of transparency, lack of accountability. £35 billion of British taxpayers' money, not even going through the forensic scrutiny. The government tried to hide all of this, and that is not acceptable.
I fact-checked this. I mean, it's easy to do. It's out there. The actual cost is estimated at 3.4 billion over 99 years in today's value. Even if you ignore how money works and just stack the cash up raw, it barely scrapes 30 billion over a century. There is literally no basis for the 35 billion figure anywhere in the official documentation. She just pulled the number out of thin air because, well, it sounds scary, I guess. So let's go back to your wording because it's quite telling.
Government tried to hide all of this, and that is not acceptable.
You said that the government tried to hide all of this. No, they didn't hide it from you. You just don't get to rewrite reality and pretend your party wasn't part of the process until the very second you decided it was useful to oppose it. And that's the deeper problem here, really. This isn't about Chagos anymore. This is about the Conservatives trying to cosplay as an opposition to their own record. For 14 years, they ran the country. They owned the Foreign Office, they owned defence, they owned the legal strategy, they owned the diplomatic posture. And now, because they've lost power, they're doing this weird political ventriloquism act where they pretend their party is a furious bystander watching Labour do something outrageous, when the paper trail says that their lot lit the fuse and walked away whistling. So when they call it an absolute disgrace that Labour's doing this, what they really mean is, how dare you finish the job that we started and make it obvious that we started it?
I raised the 1966 treaty, which basically clearly says that Britain is sovereign over the particular territory, over Chagos, and it was a treaty with America, and that the Americans must be consulted on this. And in fact, the reason why the government had to pull its whole position in the debate in the House of Lords on Monday is because of the direct reference to the 1966 treaty, and we calls for the government.
No, that's you flattering yourself. Because if the treaty from 1966 was enough to detonate the whole thing, it wouldn't have taken decades, multiple governments, and years of negotiations to get to this point. It would have been dead on arrival. It's absolute nonsense, and it's why people don't trust you. And finally, the cherry on top. You keep saying national security while simultaneously treating it like a partisan prop. The real disgrace is a senior Tory going on TV acting like the Conservatives were bravely fighting this from the start, when the start of the story is your party opening the door. That's why this clip is so damning. Not because you're shouting, not because you sound confident, but because it's the kind of confident wrong that makes the whole party look unserious. If you want the public to believe you're on something as serious as national security, then you don't get to play fast and loose with the facts that can be checked in literal minutes. Because when you do that, you're not holding the government to account, you're just making sure that nobody trusts you with power ever again.